Fantastic. Thanks for the intro, and it's great to be here. I'm Michelle, and I help lead the Design for Play team that runs out of IDEO's Toy Lab. And we work in toy invention and license a lot of products to bigger toy manufacturers, as well as create apps that we launch on our own, as well as with our partners such as Sesame Workshop and Fisher-Price. And throughout all of this, staying true to IDEO's user-centered research, we bring in kids through the whole time. And we do that because even though a lot of us remember being kids at one point, and some of us are parents, and so we feel like we have that extra knowledge, we find that there's a lot of things that we forget, and that kids really are a different set of people that is very much worth going and talking to them and understanding what makes them tick and how that can then feed into really great products. So I love this picture because it really kind of points out a few of those differences between adults and kids. It shows us that kids aren't just small adults, because this kid just finger painted, and she has paint all over the place and on all of her fingers. We've done a similar finger painting exercise with students at Stanford, and at the end we ask them to show us their hands, and usually college students will have yellow, red, blue, green. They really want to make sure they don't mix everything up and get that mucky gray and brown at the end. But kids think in the moment. They know what they want to do, and they're just going to do it. I'm also guessing that this little girl is not worried about what happens when she removes her hands from her face, because kids aren't necessarily tuned into some of those social norms, and they're just very excited to dive in. They're also very detail-oriented. So whereas you might not find someone who's willing to say, I am 34 3/4, you probably will find a child who will say, I am 2 years and 8 months as of Tuesday. So some very different differences there. The other thing that we love to see is that kids just think differently. They see the world through different eyes. And so to help get us back into that mindset, I want to show a series of pictures and get your thoughts, try to channel your 5-year-old self. And what do you see in this picture? And feel free to shout out if you have any guesses. Toys and shoes, yeah. So yeah, a lot of, you talk to adults and it's very much, toys and shoes, maybe storage, or garages. Yeah, garages are a good guess, and that gets a little closer. So if you start thinking about what a 5-year-old might think, these are beds for their cars, because their cars are like people, and of course they need somewhere to sleep. And look at this, the shoe is a perfect fit. Here's another one. Thoughts on this one? This one's a little harder because, one, people don't think about ghosts just materializing in front of them. And secondly, they probably don't think about ghosts being busy and having work that they need to do. So this is a ghost having a very busy day and getting done to work. This one. And this one's interesting because I'll talk to adults, and a lot of times they come out and like, oh, it's a tiger in a cage, which it's interesting to hear that house. Yeah, house, yeah, there we go. So yeah, and this is very much a child who thought the day would be snowy. They wanted to create this snowy environment, and Tigger is staying warm in his house out of the cold. And we'll just do one more. How about this one? This one's interesting because, yeah, crash. It's interesting because this one changes even depending on what age child you're talking to. So a lot of adults and older kids will say, oh my gosh, that car is being bullied. They're all bullies, and they're being mean to that little car in the middle. The child who set this up actually set up this way because the car in the middle is sick, and those are all of his car friends coming to check to see if he's okay. And kids are just really sweet. They think in ways that are really innocent and really open your eyes in new ways. So knowing that kids have that different mindset and have this really unique way of looking at the world, how do we harness some of that energy to then just create products that also resonate with that and that respond to kids' natural behaviors? And at IDEO, it's all about user-centered design. So we always go out to the users and try to include them through as much of the process as possible, because we acknowledge that when we go out there, we have certain preconceptions, but they're not always right. So what do kids really think about? What's valuable to them? What are their challenges? And what do they hope to do? So throughout this talk, I want to bring up some tips that we've learned as we've gone through the process of talking to kids and how we've gotten the most out of our sessions with them. So first off, you have to set up the sessions. And I think one of the things that people are worried about doing is calling on family and friends. But this is actually a huge asset. You shouldn't be afraid to talk to family and friends. It's great to also target any demographics you want to talk to and go and do the recruiting if you need specific kids. But a lot of times we'll have a question in the afternoon, just like, I don't know if the kid will resonate with this, if they can do this. And in this case, we'll just put an email out to all of IDEO in my office in Palo Alto and just say, anyone have a kid they can bring in tomorrow afternoon or have a friend who can stop by? And that's really helpful for many reasons. Sometimes you know which kids are the most responsive. They're already familiar with you, so you don't have to get through that shyness at the first. And it also helps in terms of getting feedback after the fact, because you know the parents and they can feed more information to you. Another one is to remember to be flexible, because kids, even though they don't work, do have very, very busy schedules. They're in school, they're in daycare. They also have a very specific nap time, and they need to eat at very specific times. You don't want to schedule observation when a child is hungry. That will not go well. So keep that in mind. You also want to schedule backup observations, because things happen. You know, kids get sick, or they throw a tantrum, and they just don't make it to your observation. So if you know you want to talk to 5 kids, don't count on just those 5, and it's okay to schedule extra, and you can let the parents know, hey, you know, I think I have everyone I need, but in case, would you mind being a backup? And parents appreciate you being honest about that, and a lot of them will say, fine, you know, if you need someone else, give us a call and we'll swing by. And then the other thing is to build in buffer, because you don't want to schedule back-to-back 30-minute observations. Chances are a child will run late, or they will arrive and they'll need to go use the potty and they get distracted. So make sure you build in some buffer, because you might end up starting an observation 15 minutes late and you'll have to jump back in and want to give that kid enough time before you have to go to the next observation. Next, I just want to walk through the different moments we have kid involvement. I think this is different than how some other groups do it, because we start all the way from inspiration. We include kids in co-creation, validation, usability, and then all the way through feedback. And I present these linearly, but they really do intersect and keep coming back over and over again. And I'm going to walk through each of these and kind of point out the tips that help us in each of these areas, as well as point out some observations that we pulled out that have been really helpful in creating products. So I'll start with inspiration. And in this case, we are starting at the very beginning of the project, and we want to go out there and just find out what's really interesting. We might have hypotheses, and we might bring what we call sacrificial concepts to test, but really we want to see what's going on in the kids' world. So in this case, we want to set the child at ease. We know as adults ourselves, you probably are not going to be the most willing to tell what's important to you and really give great answers and be very honest if you don't feel at ease with the person. So one way we do this is that we might actually have the observation in the child's home, because there the child's in control and they know where they are. We also will try to get down at the child's level. So when the child comes, we take the time to introduce ourselves. We'll kneel down. We'll compliment their shoes. That's a great way to really open up the conversation, because kids often pick their shoes and they're really proud of them. We want to build rapport with the whole family and make parents feel at ease too, but we want to make everyone know that we are there to speak to the child and the child is the expert. We'll even make little badges for the kids that say child expert, so they feel like they have an important role and they really are contributing to our efforts. We have them show versus tell. I have a 3-year-old, and I might ask him how his day goes, and often it has to do with dragons came by and my friend was attacked and I helped save him. If I wanted to know what he really did in school, sometimes it's better to have him show me and actually point out what toys he played with. The imaginary part is also really interesting. It can be really inspirational, but depends on what your tactic is. So if we're in a child's home, we'll have them walk us around, and that's really important because we know where they stand, because not all 3-year-olds are the same. If you are creating an app that's very much geared towards a preschooler with content like Sesame Street content, and you walk around their room and they have pictures of Beyonce everywhere, this might not be your target child, and it's good for you to know that and have that background. The last one is to bring props. So if there's something you're specifically trying to study, for example, you're trying to get at how do kids respond to competitive versus games that are more collaborative, then you might want to bring samples yourself, because you can't count on that actually being in the kids' room. In this instance, we were trying to figure out how kids play with their vehicles, and you've probably seen some of this yourself, but we'll see like when a child grabs an airplane, they'll actually put their arms out and they'll pretend to be the airplane themselves. Another thing we saw is that kids playing with cars might be running them on a table, but when they get to the edge, either it's a fiery crash or they take off and they start to fly because the car magically transforms into an airplane. So taking those as observations, we turned these into a couple different products. One was Wind Control Dusty, which is a new remote control experience that was licensed to Disney. And that came out of one observation that kids had a hard time just having the dexterity to control little joysticks on traditional remote controls. But two, because they're already doing this motion, why not just make that the remote control? So now when kids tilt, that controls the plane, and the plane tilts too, and they understand too what's going on in terms of cause and effect. And it feeds into a behavior that they're already doing versus trying to teach them a new one. The second one was for Quick Tech. It's a Batman toy, which directly off of that observation is a bike when it's on the table, but as soon as it goes off the table, you can flick it back, and it magically becomes wings, and now Batman can fly. Next, on co-creation, so we'll bring kids in, and they'll actually help us come up with ideas and develop them further. And with this, it's really important, you want to treat kids with respect. So we make them feel like, yes, you are one of the designers, you're one of us. We're not here with adults and children, we're all designers. And it's also important to be open-minded. So while you might think an activity will go a certain way or expecting certain answers, sometimes they'll blow you away with what they come up with, and it's a better idea that you should actually go with. So in this example, this child is helping us understand what dances we might incorporate into an app that we made called Monster Moves. And who knew that one of the most popular dances with kids is just falling on the floor. So that was an interesting dance move, but not one that we originally had. Provide multiple materials and activities. So for this, we also had parts where we acted, and they helped us figure out what it looked like on a card. We had ones where they drew, ones where they acted. Kids are different, just like adults. Some of us love to draw, some of us like to dance. Having a few activities in your back pocket will help the whole activity go smoother, and just being able to read what resonates with each child will help that activity go further along as well. And then lastly, make it fun, because the last thing you want to do is make this seem like work or homework. And I think the biggest compliment is when we leave and the child asks if we can come back tomorrow for another play date, because they actually have fun with it. And that gets them to want to volunteer again. And every time they come in, they're really excited to test something out that's new and hopefully contribute to a final product. So again, he's helping us figure out the dance moves and how to visualize them. We had cards that had symbols. They meant nothing. It turned out what he really wanted were cards that showed the actions themselves. So when we created the app, we had all these really fun dance moves, some of them that came from kids themselves, but it was about picking out that one key moment in the dance that was signature that the kids could then recognize and select to put into their dance routine. Concept validation, so this isn't just the big idea, but we might have little things we want to test along the way. And to do that, we bring the kids in and we'll set them up. It could be paper prototypes, it could be just interactive screens. All along the way, any prototype you want to test, we consider that concept validation. And I'll show you a couple of videos, but watching is just as important as listening, because you can read a lot off of a child's face. Great thing about kids is they're not good at hiding. Again, remember, they don't know the social construct, so they're not going to try to make you feel good. If they don't get it, they'll say it. And if they're really not excited, they know where that home button is on your iPad. They will get themselves out of the activity. So that's all part of it. Being mindful of time and energy levels. If a child's just tired or they've been on an activity for too long, be okay with cutting the session short, because you're not going to get any good feedback if they're not in the right spirit. Allow attention to wander a bit. You kind of want to get them back to what you're hoping to solve. But again, the kids know where that home button is, so they will hit that. They will look for other apps that they can play with. And you don't want to force them to do your app. You might just say, great, let's see what else attracts your attention. Let's see what else you can learn from. We then use those apps as benchmarks, because you can learn a lot from other existing apps that are out there. You don't just want to test your own. But just kind of get them back. Say, okay, after we do that, maybe we can go back to this app and try it again later. And that compromise works really well with kids. So I mentioned I have a couple of videos. So here's one to check out, and these are actual kids testing.
Easily, that's right.
This is for Elmo Calls. It was released 5 years ago and still sits near the top of the charts for preschool kids 5 and under. Oops. And this was a video call. You can see this in contrast to what happened when we had an audio call. Just kind of looking up like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Why do you want me to look at this? Yeah, so again, the concept of Elmo calling you was a big concept, but then we whittled it down to well, what is the difference between video calls and audio calls? And with audio calls, what's the right level of visual to put with it? because we did have audio calls and that was the content we were given, but you didn't want to create visuals that were totally distracting so that they didn't even understand what they heard, and you also didn't want ones that lost their engagement. So we tested a few different prototypes to figure out what was the right level there. This was the final app. Another big thing that came out of that was that picture of the child in the lower left corner was enough for a child to feel engaged. This is how kids talk to their grandparents through Skype and FaceTime. So if they see themselves, they think they're talking to Elmo. They don't need Elmo to stop and say, what do you think? And knowing that helped us not put the energy into AI and voice recognition, because we knew the magic was there just with that window. So then we could put the time into coming up with better content for the calls and developing more things, like more songs, more stories that really meant more to the child. The other point is that when we talk to kids, we also bring the parents in and we're watching their reactions. So we have a parent section to Elmo calls, and this is a tool for the parent. So the parent can trigger any of the calls that are on there. They can also schedule calls, and there are calls on there that have to do with time to brush your teeth, or let's go potty, or it's time to go to bed. And this becomes a great tool because anyone who's a parent knows that you can get your child to try to go to the potty over and over and over again and not get anywhere. But it's amazing when Elmo calls and said, hey, let's go potty. That child zooms right to the bathroom. So it was also a great chance to figure out how could this be a helpful app for parents as well. Usability testing, and this is different because now we're really focused on can the child do it. It's not does the concept matter, but can they actually do what you want them to do given the tools that are in front of them. So for this, one is just give them space. I mean, if someone's asking you to do something, you don't necessarily want them standing over your shoulder and watching your every move. It's intimidating, and it's not going to get you to use it as you normally would. You also want one child at a time, because if you have siblings especially, those older siblings are very quick to say, like, no, you're doing it wrong. You got to do it this way. So you want to separate those for a little while. Maybe you can test something else with an older sibling. And you want to limit distractions. So that's not just crazy things on the wall or too much noise. It's also the spinny chairs or chairs with wheels. That's one of the biggest distractions. And a lot of times someone will run and be like, oh, we forgot to swap the chairs. And they'll like drag the chairs out. Because if you have a spinny chair, a child will sit there and just like the whole time go like this, and you're trying to show them something and they're just like, this chair is really fun. Which you can let them play with the chairs afterwards, but when you're trying to get some information out of them, you want to limit those distractions. And lastly, take video, because there's nuances you won't notice at the time, because you're also focused on watching the child and making sure they're entertained and they're following along, giving you some of the answers that you want. It also helps you see commonalities between kids. So I'll show you in a second an example of that. It also lets you show other team members who can't be there, because again, you want to limit the number of adults in the room so it's not intimidating, and you want to make sure that team members see it later on, because it means a lot more for them to see it themselves than for you to read off your notes. I've been in retail environments before too, where we created a mobile app to go with that, and engineers couldn't understand why endless scroll was a bad idea until they saw the video where the adult was like, I want to know more about this company. I want to know more about this company. I want to know more, and everything kept scrolling. It helped to actually see that happen and see the frustration that someone had. So here's a video of a child using the Apple remote. We've been really intrigued to see how kids interact with this new medium. And typical adult will have one hand on the remote and just kind of easily swipe through and tap. But in this video, you'll notice that she has two hands on the remote. She's holding it with one hand and she's swiping and clicking with the other. And sometimes it's not the dominant hand, which makes it a lot harder to swipe and click and do all those other things. But this also influences things like the tutorial, because why would you give them a tutorial that shows them how to do it in a way that's not naturally the way they behave, and that makes it harder for them to use the remote? If you see a number of kids using two hands, which we did see universally, they all use two hands, then the tutorial should reflect that, because that's how they will best interact with your app. One other thing is that we try to build empathy ourselves. So this is when the first iPhone came out, and we realized how small a child's hands were compared with an iPhone. And I can show you now with my own phone, because these are almost as big as this mock-up that we had at the beginning. But one thing we noticed is that kids, when they try to hold a phone, it's really heavy. And if you have little hands, it falls over, which is why most of our apps are landscape, unless you have to mimic a phone like an Elmo calls. The other thing, though, is when you hold it this way, Those red dots represent how far their thumbs can reach towards the center of the screen, because they can't reach towards the center. With this phone, I can't text when I'm holding it with one hand because it's just too big. And we couldn't really feel that for ourselves until we made ourselves a mock-up that made the phone in the right scale according to our hands, like a child would experience it. Feedback. So even after an app launches, great things about apps are you can keep updating them. We continue to try to learn. It's not just ship it and then see what happens. So when we test new apps, we always bring our existing apps out too and just see how those are doing. It's fine that they're already done with production, but is there anything new we can learn there? We review the data, of course, like the Google Analytics, Flurry, as well as the qualitative data of reading reviews to understand what resonates and what's really frustrating. And we learn, again, from feedback on other apps. So what are we seeing when kids play with other apps? What do they react to? And this is where it comes in really handy with friends and family. We follow up with parents, because sometimes you get a kid who's really shy and they don't say a lot when they're working with you, but they leave and they get in the car and the parent calls you later and it's like, my child talked nonstop from leaving your office to coming home, and this is what they loved, this is what they didn't understand why they were doing it, and they can give you that report. Friends and family, coworkers are best at that because they know that that's important for you. Even better is when they send you video. So this is an example of a video that one of my coworkers sent after his kids had come in. And here we go. So this app was actually an iOS app. It was only for iPhone and iPad. He had taken it home and he projected it on his TV and he's like, look what happened. Like all of a sudden the kids are up, they're active. He had 3 kids and everyone from the, I think it was 4-year-old to 9-year-old were engaged. And you can even hear the parents laughing in the background. Everyone was involved, which is really intriguing. And there was something there. So that really inspired us to then come up with Monster Moves Dance, which was a TV app and focus more on the dance experience and learning dance moves versus choreographing dance moves, which is what happened in the iOS app. But we got that and was highly inspired because we got that video from a parent after the fact. So those are kind of some tips, a quick overview of how we bring kids in. We continue to learn every time we come in. It's not an exhaustive list of tips, and I know a lot of you do research as well and probably have your own ways of conducting research. Would love to hear how you build off of this to keep learning from kids and create great products. Feel free to reach out anytime at michelle@ideo.com. But thank you, appreciate that.
So have we got any questions? What is the, I guess, quirkiest or most entertaining thing that you've learned doing kids research?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different moments. Some of the ones that stand out, which really contradicted what we thought, we have an app called Balloonimals, and in it you blow up a balloon by blowing into the microphone of your phone, and this balloon blows up, and then you shake it, and it creates an animal, and then you can play with the animal, and then at the end, we're like, oh, how do you get to the next animal? Well, it's a balloon, so obvious choice, let's pop it. But we really thought that that would scare a lot of kids, or children would be upset if they were popping this friend that they just created and are playing with. Totally contradictory. Now we showed it and every kid loved it. They laughed and they thought that was most exciting. Some kids blew up their balloon and like immediately wanted to pop it because it's exciting. It's a big pixel change. And that was one of those instances where if we had gone with our instincts, we probably would have lost the most important part, the most fun part of that app. So that's definitely an instance where it's test it out, see what happens, see what the kids say.
Anybody else? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.